Hello, Flyleafers. Thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate author Sarah Ramey's incredible memoir, The Lady's Handbook for Her Mysterious Illness, in conversation with Dr. Polly Watson. I'm Maggie, the new Marketing and Events Manager here at Flyleaf Books. Before we begin, if you have any questions during the event, please put them in the chat or in the Ask a Question tab at the bottom of the screen, and I'll ask them towards the end of the evening. You can find out all about our virtual events by clicking on the link at the top of the screen. If you'd like to make a donation to Flyleaf to help us continue to bring great programs like this one to you in the future, please click the donate button below our faces. If you'd like to support Flyleaf and tonight's author, we have a copy of Sarah's book, The Lady's Handbook for Her Mysterious Illness, available for purchase. Just click the green buy button beneath our faces. You can also call Flyleaf to order over the phone, or if you're local to Chapel Hill, come visit us and shop our shelves. We're now open 7 days a week. And now I'd like to welcome our author for tonight's event. Sarah Ramey is a writer and a musician. She received an MFA in creative nonfiction writing from Columbia University and was a writer for President Obama's 2008 campaign. She's been featured in the Paris Review, Ms. Magazine, Salon, The Atlantic, and The Washington Post. The Lady's Handbook for Her Mysterious Illness was a starred selection for Publishers Weekly, Kirkus Reviews, and Booklist, and was chosen as one of the best books of 2020 by Bookpage. Sarah's been living with serious chronic pain and illness for 17 years, and The Lady's Handbook for Her Mysterious Illness is her first book. Sarah's in conversation with Dr. Polly Watson, a board-certified OBGYN who has been refining her practice of women's medicine for almost 20 years. Dr. Watson started attending conferences with AIHM, the Academy of Integrated Health and Medicine, in 2015 and 2016. In 2017, she began the Institute for Functional Medicine Certificate Program. Dr. Watson completed the IFMCP in 2019. She is one of about 1,000 providers in the US who has obtained this certification. As an impassioned, lifelong learner, she continues to improve her practice of medicine to discover and heal the root source of illness. I'm going to minimize myself now so that we can focus on the author, but I'll pop back in about 40 minutes to moderate those great questions that you all are going to post in the Q&A and in the chat.
So Sarah, thank you so much for writing this book. I think this can help so many women and their loved ones, and hopefully their doctors, that can read and be inspired to change their practices and learn more. So for folks who maybe haven't had a chance to read your book, maybe you could share a little bit of your story with us and also kind of let us know how you're doing.
Yes, so thank you so much. Thank you to Flyleaf for hosting this, and thank you to you, Dr. Watson, for having this conversation. I'm so excited. So yes, so the book is about, I have a pretty complicated medical story. And so I'll tell you a little bit about kind of how it began and how that led into writing a book about this. So when I was 22 years old, I was in college. I was super healthy, super, normal. I hesitate to say normal, but just no issues and no real issues. And I was in an a cappella group. I was a singer in a very loud band. I was directing the school musical. I was very active, and but I had a urinary tract infection, a UTI, and which is no fun, but kind of compared to what would come later, it was, nothing. But at the time it was a big deal. And so of course, it wouldn't go away. It was treated a bunch, wouldn't go away. So I finally came home from college and went to go see, the best urologist that is, in town. And he said, I know what this is. This is not a real UTI. It's just muscle spasm. And what we do is I'm going to put this instrument inside of you, and it's going to stretch the urethra. It's called a urethral dilation. It's a little bit painful, but nothing serious. You'll be fine. So I said, okay. And of course, up until this moment, I had never had anything but excellent interactions with doctors. My parents are both doctors. Like most people that don't have one of these illnesses, my experience was you get sick, you go to the doctor, they tell you what's wrong, they help you get through it. That's it. It's a pretty simple transaction, and it's amazing, right? To have these people that are there to help you when you are at your most vulnerable. So that's what it was basically until this moment. And then we went into the exam room, he begins the procedure. It's supposed to be not painful at all. And instead, it's the most painful thing I've ever experienced in my life. It's like, having a nail hammered into that part of the body. It was excruciatingly painful. And I won't go into the rest of it, but very painful procedure. He was very upset with me that I was upset about this procedure. And there was just a lot of back and forth, but then, I was sort of sent on my merry way, waddling out of the office. I was bleeding. And he said, it's going to be fine. Just suck it up. It's going to be fine. And so I go home thinking, okay, I got to suck it up. I got to be tough. I got to just be strong, and I'm going to get through this. It'll be fine by tomorrow. And in the middle of the night, I woke up. I was drenched in sweat. I had a sky-high fever. I was extremely sick. And I was very lucky that I was home with my physician mother, because I, dragged myself downstairs and said, Mom, something is horribly wrong. And she, looked at me and immediately realized that I was septic, or had become septic, which is an infection of the bloodstream, which is often fatal. It's very serious. You have to go to the hospital. So immediately go to the hospital, put on a lot of antibiotics, and, I was saved, right? Essentially, it was like, yes, you've become septic, you're on antibiotics. We don't know what happened. The doctor said it was an absolutely normal procedure, so who knows what happened here. They ran a bunch of tests, couldn't figure it out. And so they said, we don't know what's wrong, but of course, you're just going to bounce back and you're going to be fine. And we'll send you back to school with some more antibiotics, IV antibiotics, and you'll just get better and better. And that had always been my experience. You just bounce back, you just get better and better. And so I go back to school, and I was not getting better and better. I felt like I had the flu constantly. My muscles ached and burned. I was sleeping 18 hours a day. I had severe brain fog and couldn't really read or keep up with my schoolwork anymore. And on a separate track, I had unbelievably severe vaginal pain, and my colon stopped functioning, and I need to take all these laxatives. So this is a lot of problems. And I was in my head thinking, I'm going to get better and better. I'm going to get better and better, because that's what you do. You get better and better. But a month and a half went by. I was not getting better and better. And everybody else went off to spring break, like on vacation. And I went home and saw, 15 new doctors to try to figure out what was wrong with me. And they ran every test, in the Western world. And, almost everything came back negative. You're perfectly healthy, Ms. Ramey. And this really dragged on for a long time, for months and months, and we couldn't figure out. And what happened is, in the beginning, everybody thought, this is very serious. We have to figure out what's wrong with this poor young woman. But as all of my tests came back negative, a new idea started to emerge in the minds of most of my doctors, which is, well, if her tests say that there's nothing wrong with her, then in fact there is nothing wrong with her, and it's all in her mind. And I remember the first urologist who said that to me. I was with my parents. We had just done this very painful procedure, but it was negative. It didn't show the thing that he was looking for. And he called my parents in to the office and said, what I think you need to consider here, Dr. Ramey and Dr. Larson, is that, and he's not even talking to me, I'm sitting right there, is that Sarah's problem, like so many young women her age, is psychological. And that's exactly how he did it, with his glasses, and he was so serious about it. And I was so crushed. Of course, like as anyone would be, if you are really sick and you have some very serious problems. I couldn't wear pants anymore because of the pelvic pain. I was in the bathroom all the time because of the laxatives. I was sleeping constantly. I felt like I had the flu. I was really sick. Mm-hmm. But I was told that it was all made up. So that's kind of how it began. And that sort of suite of symptoms is kind of how it began, and how it remains today. There's been, I won't go into the whole story, but there's been, a whole roller coaster of ups and downs with the severity of being, okay enough to, work in politics. I worked for Obama, all the way to being, completely and totally bedridden, using a wheelchair sometimes, my mother having to take care of me and feed me. So a real spectrum. And for the majority of that time, I had no diagnoses. I had no doctors who were saying, here's what's wrong with you, and there's no treatment, but we're going to take care of you and we believe you. That just didn't exist. I just went from doctor to doctor to doctor who said, there's nothing wrong with you. You're absolutely fine. And so a couple of years into it, I began to realize that I was not the only person that was dealing with this exact problem. I met my first, I call us WOMIs, which is a woman with a mysterious illness. There's also MOMIs, a man of mysterious illness, or a POMI, a person of mysterious illness. It's just a name for this type of illness: chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, a lot of autoimmune diseases, Lyme, postural orthostatic tachycardia. There's a family of sort of related syndromes that are often comorbid with each other, but most importantly, they just have a lot of symptom overlap. And those symptoms, when you bring them to your traditionally trained doctor, produce this response of, I don't believe you, you're not sick, and go home. And that is horrifying, but it turns out that it's extremely, extremely common. I thought I was the only person. It turns out, there are millions and millions of carbon copies of Sarah Ramey's out there with, maybe less vaginal pain, but like a lot of the same symptoms, particularly when it comes to the flu-like feelings, just feeling awful and tired all the time, and the gastrointestinal and hormonal problems. And so that's how the book was born. Was I wanted to put my sort of training as a writer and as a researcher into figuring out, A, what was wrong with me, and B, what was wrong with all of us, what was going on with the illnesses themselves, but also with medicine, that it would treat us this way, because it didn't make any sense to me that all of these people would have the exact same story and illness and be treated as if it's not happening. It just didn't compute to me. And so that's what the book is about, is really getting into all of that and exploring kind of what is going on, how did we get here, and how do we get out of this?
And can you tell us sort of how you're doing today?
Yes, thank you. So I really appreciate this question, because I am acutely aware that I look super healthy and normal. I get it. I think if I was the doctor on the other side of the desk, I would be like, looks okay to me. So my sort of most important diagnoses are, I do have chronic fatigue syndrome. It's also called myalgic encephalomyelitis, or ME/CFS, for chronic fatigue syndrome. So if I refer to it in the future as ME/CFS, that's what that means. It's chronic fatigue. And that means that you really have an incredibly limited amount of energy to do anything. Like doing this today is the thing. And I always say that it's like, it's important for me to do events for the book, but it's also, it's a major trade-off for me, but you got to do it because it's my job. So, and I enjoy doing it. It's just so difficult to have such little energy that you have to make these huge trade-offs of, do I want to do an event, or do I want to, do my laundry, or do, some other, energy expending activity. So number 2, I also have, it's called complex regional pain syndrome, which is in my pelvic area and my abdomen and my spine. This is the most severe pain syndrome that exists. It really feels like you've had your skin removed and like lemon juice poured in. It's just horrible. Do not recommend. And it frequently happens when nerves have been damaged, and that hasn't been addressed. And that is what happened in that original event with the doctor. He made a mistake in that procedure. He damaged some of those nerves, and that's what set off that there was something went wrong. That's why I became septic. It's damaged those nerves. That's what caused the complex regional pain syndrome. And then the third thing is that my colon just stopped working basically over time. And so now I have an ileostomy, which is like a colostomy bag. And it's because my colon doesn't work anymore. And another invisible thing that you can't see, but is quite real and pretty serious, but is invisible. And hence the chorus, as they say in the book, 1,000 voices deep constantly, but you don't look sick. It's like, it's very difficult to if there was just one exterior thing, like if the colostomy bag was like my arm, or like I had like a boil in my face, or there was just something, even like I hurt my knee a while ago and I had to use a cane. Whew, everyone came rushing to my aid. And I was like, this is the least of my problems, but this feels great. Thank you, everyone, for your concern. Even though I don't need your help, I'm fine. My knee is just hurt, but it's fine. I do need other people's help with all those other problems. But because I don't have like a sign that says, help, I'm sick, it's really hard for people to know. And because there's no good diagnosis, like, some knowable, nobody knows what complex regional pain syndrome is. And most people have some stigmatized notion of what chronic fatigue syndrome, Lyme, fibromyalgia, they are very stigmatized illnesses. So even if people know you have that, they're like, oh, and it's like even more reason to kind of back away and not be very helpful.
Yeah. And I think the same in the medical community, right? If you say chronic fatigue syndrome, you're going to get eyes rolling and in certain circles instead of, what more questions can we ask about that? What else could be going on there? How do these things interplay?
Yes.
And when I read about your experience, I think one of the things that stands out to me is, in medicine, in traditional medicine or allopathic medicine, we're sort of trained in silos. This is the gastrointestinal system. This is the nervous system. This is the endocrine system. And we're not trained to think about connections. But when you have significant problems like you do, autonomic dysfunction, all of these things, this chronic inflammation, it crosses systems. And so we need to change the way we're thinking and invite that complexity in instead of expecting it to be a linear process. So.
Yes, I think as a patient, that's one of the most sort of surprising things to begin to realize, that like your body is sort of divided, and it's as if your body is not all connected, but it's like in a bunch of jars. Like your intestines are in this jar, your brain is in this jar, your heart is in this jar, and all your different doctors are like, this is my jar, and I don't pay attention to those jars because why would I? And that doesn't make any sense, because of course they all work together, and that's not entirely fair. Of course, doctors think about things, to some degree as interconnected, but not really. Most of my doctors who they wanted to help, but they didn't know what to do, their most common way to like press eject on me in their office was to latch on to some other problem. So like if I was there at a rheumatologist to talk about what was going on and they didn't know what to say, and I would be like, well, I also have pretty unbelievable constipation. They're like, aha, a gastroenterologist. And they would push that button and send me away to them. Yes.
Going back and forth.
Yes. And you could see them like light up in their eyes. It was like, oh, thank God I can send this person away. And that is, as I'm laughing now, but as a patient, that just feels so bad, because you can tell, like, you're not, I think a lot of physicians that I've seen, I think they think that you don't understand that they have this bad feeling towards you. But it's like, especially if you're an empathic person, like you feel it all, and it feels really bad to be like, this person is annoyed by my presence as a patient. Like, that is a terrible way to feel by the people who are supposed to be there to take care of you. And so that is, and I know that that's a universal experience for anyone who has any of this family, the quote mystery illnesses. It's all the same experience. It's almost identical for each of us when we go to the doctor.
And it's so hard because you're at the healthcare provider in your most vulnerable state.
Yeah.
Right? You're naked, you're in pain, you're scared, and then you're made to feel like you're wasting their time or you're a nuisance. And so that's not healing at all.
No, it's not. I frequently say, sorry to anybody who's here who's heard me say this before, but I frequently say it is very similar to if you call up the fire department and you say, my house is burning down, and the person on the other end says, no, I don't buy it. They hang up on you, right? Or like, oh, I know this type of caller, like, I know your type. And then they hang up. Like, that is the only person that can help you with your house burning down. And they say no. then your house burns down, then your health burns to the ground. And it's incredibly scary because it's the most important thing you have. It's like why we, when, we're at our worst, people frequently say, well, at least we have our health. And it's like, it's that foundational, it's that important. And when you don't have that, and the people who are supposed to take care of you don't seem to care at all that you are so sick, it's really, it's frightening. And it's something that I think that a lot of doctors don't realize, that like that's the knock-on effect, because they don't think that you're actually sick. And so I think often that they're doing you a favor by being like, let me explain what's happening here. You're just anxious. And if you just take these anti-anxiety medications, that pesky illness of yours is going to go away. You're welcome. And that is, and then what happens is that you don't go back to that doctor because fuck that doctor. I mean, like you're not going to go back to that doctor, but they don't really get that feedback because there's sort of like a feedback loop interruption, because you're not going to write to them usually and say like, I didn't come back to see you because you made me feel small and insignificant and bad about myself. You just don't go back to see them. So in their minds, I think a lot of them are like, she probably took that medication and got better. And that, I think that that's one of the issues, because I know that that's true for some of the doctors that I've seen, where I saw them many years later. They're like, oh, I just assumed that you did what we talked about, and that because you didn't come back, it was all settled and it was all worked out. And I'm like, no, it was because you were horrible to me. And the only reason I'm here now is you're the only expert in this area. And so I have to see you again,
Well, and when you have chronic fatigue syndrome, and like you're saying, how you have to kind of meter out your energy, you have to be careful, right? And so, you may not want to spend your energy for that day crafting an email to whatever. And so you're moving on.
Exactly. No, that's such a good point. Writing these emails, especially because for you, they're so emotionally charged, is a lot of energy. And so you're not going to do that because like your health is your priority, and just getting through the day is your priority, not re-educating this person. But I really do see how that, like how the problem kind of perpetuates just because there isn't a good feedback mechanism for those doctors to hear, or even like a penalty or anything. There's nothing happens when they act that way. And that's, I think, really problematic. I wish there were just a little penalty that was just like, just to be, just a little stick to say, do not do that because you're causing harm. And that is breaching the oath, right? Like if you're causing real psychological harm, which I like, by far the most psychologically difficult thing for me in all of this, in going through so much hell physically. I mean, over and away, the biggest psychological thing I've had to deal with is being treated like garbage by so many people who I would in another context really respect, and to just be treated so badly and also, gaslit and told like it's in my mind. It's hard for that to not get into your mind and to like burrow in and sort of get in there. So, which is the thing I kind of resent the most. I'm like, get this out of here. I didn't put this here. This is not fair that I have to walk around with these doubts about myself because somebody else is just not educated about these illnesses. Like that's their fault, not mine. But I have to walk around with sort of the effects of their lack of training and lack of knowledge.
Well, I think that segues into kind of maybe who the book is for, because I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, let's start delegating, right? Sarah doesn't have a lot of energy. And if we can use this book for other WOMIs to say, and I need you to write an email and I can sign my name to it. Let me let you know how that made me feel, right? We could use that to delegate, but then you've provided the world with this great tool so that maybe we can help other WOMIs who aren't feeling a lot of energy So maybe you can talk about who else it might be for. I mean, I'm thinking about support groups and giving them homework, right?
Yes, I love this because so people have these illnesses because you don't have the stamp of approval from your doctor and like the pamphlet that you bring home and you say, I'm sorry, everyone, I have to let you know I've got this terrible disease. Here's what you can do. Here are some websites. Like, here's what people usually do. That just doesn't exist. So you go to your friends and family and you're like, I have chronic fatigue syndrome. And they're like, isn't that a made up disease? You know, it's like the opposite of what's supposed to happen. And so yes. So in terms of what this book can be for is I'll frequently tell people, especially womies who are too sick to read it themselves or too sick to really do anything. Just like, you don't have to read it. You already know this story. What I would do if you have a copy already or you want to send a copy, give it to the people in your life that you need them to understand you better, that they don't, somebody in your life who you know wants to understand you, but definitely doesn't, and is kind of doing the wrong things. Those are the most receptive. I've heard from so many people who gave it to a parent who was just giving them such a hard time over, decades, or to a spouse. I've gotten a lot of pictures of like a husband and a wife reading it, right, or partners reading it together, just because it gives you. It's not necessarily, even though the book is the Ladies' Handbook for Mysterious Illness, that's like a joke title. It's not like here's how you must act. What it really is it's like it's a narrative of this incredibly common story that like the woman in your life has probably experienced, 80% at least of this. And so what the book can be is like a jumping off point for talking about like, okay, this is exactly how I feel, or this part is exactly what I went through with my rheumatologist or my neurologist or whatever. And it gives you sort of a framework. I think that when it's in other people's words, it makes it seem less like begging someone to believe your words. Like you're like, no, this is a real person wrote this for a real publishing house. Mm-hmm. And I think it really helps. I've just heard from so many people. And so I really always encourage people to give it to the support network that should be there around you, because when we get sick, like that's what I do as a sick person for other sick people. Like that's what we do. We show up for each other to whatever degree we're able to do that, and that is really missing for these illnesses. And so I think the book can be helpful for that. And I really love I love where your head's at, that to start delegating, because it's really helpful if other people, like if an email needs to be written to friends and family to say, this is what's wrong with Sarah, here's how we can help, here's what's helpful, here's what's not helpful. Like it's not helpful to say, but you don't look sick. For example, that's much better if it comes from somebody else, from the para-WOMI community, from the people around them instead of the WOMI themselves. And so as a healthy person, you usually have the capacity to do something like that, to spend an afternoon writing that up. And I can just tell you, it means so much to us when people do that type of thing, particularly around bringing in support. Like I think that's the thing that most of us feel so heartbroken about, is that we don't have the support of our loved ones in our worst time of our life. And so, but we just feel for whatever reason, it's very difficult to just advocate for yourself. It's important to advocate for yourself, but it's normal to have other people advocate for you. And so I think that's like a great place for anyone who knows and loves a WOMI, MOMI, POMI to start there with like, well, what can I do to bring in other people to support this person in an ongoing way, even to just witness them in an ongoing way that's like, I see you, I know that you're suffering, I'm so sorry that you are suffering. To us, that never happens, and it just feels like manna from heaven to feel somebody saying, I believe you. And so I would start there if I was anybody that loves a WOMI. That's where I would begin.
As a physician, I'd like to say that I think this is a great book for doctors to read or healthcare providers to read, because one thing that I think is unique about your story is that you came from a family of doctors. You are not someone who suffered from this mysterious illness that had no resources. You had an enormous amount of resources. You
All
had super smart parents, grandparents that were famous as endocrinologists, right? Like, and so you did not start this journey from, you know, smelling like patchouli and I'm going to be a vegan and da 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 da. Like, you came from the allopathic medical world. And so the allopathic medical world failed you. The Mayo Clinic failed you. And so when we kind of hold those institutions up and someone like you has a horrific experience, we have to start looking, we have to have some self-reflection. So I think this is a really great book for self-reflection and to kind of go back and through and think, and to have the courage to tell a patient, I'm sorry you're suffering. I don't know how to help you. Let's brainstorm. We can come up with 3 people I could refer you to. I'm sorry, I don't know how to help, but to claim that, to own it, right? How rewarding would that have been?
I feel like I just healed a little bit hearing you say that. It's like a pantomime, like, because I mean, the number of times that's been said to me is maybe 3 maximum of like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of doctor's visits. And that it's astounding to me that saying that the block really does seem to be an inability to say, I don't know what's wrong with you. And instead of taking that on, and I can see, you know, like that there's some, you know, that sort of wounds the ego a little bit, that like, I don't know what's wrong, but that somebody could justify saying, sort of going past like, well, I feel bad about saying, I don't know what's wrong. And so I'm going to leap from there to saying, and so therefore the problem is you, and it's all in your head. And it's a made up problem because it's not possible for me to not know what's wrong. It has to be that you're what's wrong, Sarah. And that just can't be. And I really think that it's just that I frequently, whenever I talk to like groups of doctors, a question I get is, you know, well, if there's not that much research about how to really help this type of patient, you know, in a way that we can really trust, which I agree with that. Like, I've got the things that I think are like a better model, like functional medicine, like what you do. But, you know, they're not going to go back and retrain in functional medicine overnight. They're like, well, if I can't help the patient, well, what am I supposed to do? And I'm like, well, as if to say like that justifies telling the patient that they made it up. I'm like, well, we can start with the most important thing, which is just shifting from, well, I don't know what's wrong, you're perfectly healthy, your tests say you're perfectly healthy, to what you just said, which is, I am so sorry that this is happening to you. I absolutely believe you. I recognize this, because I think once you have any type of education about these types of illnesses, you do recognize them. It's not difficult to recognize the type of problem. To just say, even though I don't know exactly what to do, I am here for you. And the things that I can do, I will do. Are there tests that we can order that at least we can rule out X, Y, and Z? And that's important with the allopathically trained doctor. You know, you don't want to just like jump ship too early before you've ruled out, you know, some really important things. Just starting there with, I believe you and I care about you, that I'm sorry that you are suffering. That does so much to repair this like huge breach between doctor and patient that exists with most of patients like me. And I always say, I'm like, you are not prepared for the amount of appreciation that will come your way if you just say that from this patient. It's probably the first time they have ever heard that from a doctor. And they will be they will be like so pleased to see you every time they come in, and it will improve your life because at least you have a patient that isn't sitting there like radiating like, get me out of here, I hate these people, you know. And so I think it's just a win-win, and it's so small, making that shift from I don't believe you and I'm going to blame you to I do believe you, I don't know what to do, but I'm sorry you're going through this. That didn't take more time or training or energy. That it's just shifting basically from non-belief to belief. And that can do so much to shore up all the damage that's being done psychologically to this patient population.
Absolutely. When I'm listening to you, the medical experience was very, very traumatic. And I think as we're learning more, like, people have read The Body Keeps Score, and you mentioned Robert Navio's work on the cell danger response. And so for people who aren't familiar with that, when there's an injury to the body, it could be a toxin, it could be trauma, it could be mold in your house, it could be Lyme disease, it could be lots of things. The physiology of the cells changes, and the pH changes, the oxidative stress changes, everything changes. And so the way we were taught in school that things are supposed to work don't work the same. And so I really liked your mentioning that and thinking about trauma and how healing trauma is so important, but also that trauma scientifically causes things to change.
Yes.
And so maybe you can talk a little bit more about kind of trauma in your journey.
Yeah. So this is such a big topic, and it's a really kind of fraught one, because as patients with these problems, we're so used to having our a huge spectrum of symptoms reduced down into just the psychological, like, oh, if you do have anxiety or you have experienced trauma or you are depressed, that's all of that. What you just told me, it's just that. Mm-hmm. And that, when you're the patient and you've got all of these physical symptoms, that that's wrong. And that's like offends the soul to hear that, that it's wrong. But you also know that, yeah, you did experience a lot of trauma, or you are depressed, or you are anxious. And it would be wonderful if, like, addressing those things always made your physical symptoms go away. And sometimes it does. Like, that's important to point out. There's obviously a strong link between the mind and the body. But what happens is, and this kind of happens, I talk about in the book, on both sides of the aisle of traditional and alternative medicine, is that it's, again, collapsed down into like, okay, so you went through trauma, so I'm going to send you out to a psychiatrist to deal with your symptoms. And in alternative medicine, it's like, okay, so you dealt with a lot of trauma as a kid. We're not going to deal with doing anything else to alleviate your symptoms. I just want you to get into affirmations or brain retraining or things like that. All of which I think are all good ideas to approach all of that. It's just that when it's reduced to just that becomes really problematic, because what happens is, from our perspective, usually we're like, sure, we'll take the medication, the antidepressant, or do the affirmations or do whatever. But if you're not getting better, then what you're told by either the traditional or the alternative practitioner is, well, you're just not trying hard enough. You just haven't. You haven't given it your all, especially actually in alternative medicine. It's like you haven't affirmed enough. You haven't retrained enough. And that is, again, like, it gets this, like, I always think of it like a parasite in your brain that's like this, I'm doing this, I'm the cause of this, I can't untraumatize myself. And so that's why I'm still sick. And that is, I think, very important to protect patients against kind of turning them against themselves, at the same time as saying, and this is really important, we are going to look at this as, because we want you to get better. And so it's important to at least explore this mind-body connection and to explore, like, can we rewire the brain so that it's not in this constant fight or flight place that is triggering these, as you said, cellular responses, that is triggering these real physiologic problems in the body. Sometimes that really can be reduced down to just, the way that the brain has become sort of stuck in a fight or flight response. It's just important to not oversell that, again, as like a new miracle pill that's just like, it's all the mind, or it's all Paxil, or it's all whatever, just like always wanting it to be easy. And this one thing, no matter how complex it is, for example, the mind-body connection, which is extremely complex and should never be reduced down to like one practice or one training program. So I hope that's like an okay response, because it's the one area in the book that, like, I feel like is really tricky, because I don't want people to feel like, oh, she's just telling me to, retrain my brain or say more affirmations. I'm not saying that, but it's very clear that one of the clear predisposing factors for these illnesses in particular is a lot of childhood trauma or trauma leading up to the event that kicks it off. And or sometimes it doesn't get kicked off, it's a slow creep. But whatever it is, trauma it's called an ACE score, an Adverse Childhood Event Score. The higher that is, the more likely, this has been studied many, many, many times, the more likely it is for you to develop one of these problems. And so it makes sense to look there and to try to see if addressing that it can be helpful without anyone like letting you go and just saying, well, that's the only thing. Just go off and fix that and you'll be fine, because there are so many other things. It's just such a more complex issue than that.
One of the doctors that I really like and look up to is Neil Nathan, and he does a lot of work with the mold community and the Lyme community, and his kind of mantra over and over again is, I start with a 16th of a dose. We start really, really small. And he was speaking at a conference recently, and he was referring to Annie Hopper's DNRS program, which for folks who don't know is sort of a brain retraining, limbic system healing program. And Annie Hopper's very clear about, you've got to do an hour a day. And he's like, you know what? If you can do 7 minutes a day, that's great, right? And I really appreciate Dr. Nathan's approach in that, like, not blaming people. Oh, well, you didn't do a whole hour, right? Maybe all they can do is 7 minutes. Maybe all they can do is 7 seconds, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
That's where they are.
Exactly. And going a little bit further than that, like, okay, so we've seen some real success with some people who do brain retraining programs that are pretty intensive. But there's some data to show that it's not just anecdotal stories. There's real data to show that can help some people, not all people. So what I would like to see is like, well, studying like, well, how is that really happening? And can't we replicate that with other less difficult, because that's a very onerous thing to like retrain your brain for an hour a day doing these really intense. I've done that program and it's hard, but I did it and it didn't fix me. But let's just look at what's happening there. Like, how is the brain changing? Like, what does this have to do with neuroplasticity? And can we mimic that with transcranial magnetic stimulation or with a medication or with, there's a lot of different modalities in both traditional and alternative medicine that are basically targeting the exact same thing, which is retraining that limbic response in the brain and getting it to have a healthier response to the world around it, which is really what gets so messed up with a lot of these illnesses is just that fight or flight response is always on, and it's causing this cascade of inflammatory responses, et cetera. So that's what I'm interested in. I'm like, let's not reject that this sort of more woo-woo idea that you can like retrain your brain is too woo-woo. Let's study it scientifically and see how we can replicate it with ways that are a little bit easier and that are, that insurance will cover, and, things like that. Because, I'm just interested in getting this to the greatest number of people so that they can actually do it and get better, instead of saying like, I got better because I did the most work possible on myself, even though good for anybody who's done that. I admire anybody who has gone through the whole program and really got better. But I want to take serious that it's very difficult and most people can't do that. So, yeah. I wanted to ask you, before we go to questions, I wanted to see if you would just talk to us a little bit about because you're a allopathically, traditionally trained doctor, and what it was like making the transition from being a traditionally trained doctor into being a functional medicine doctor. You told me a little bit of the story, but I think it would be helpful to tell it for the audience.
Yeah, so I finished medical school in 21 years ago. And a big inspiration for me to go into medicine was my mom. My mom had early menopause around 38 or 39, and she was a little bit of her own womie. And no one listened to her. When she went to the doctor, she was crazy. It was all in her head. Please go take the fifth antidepressant or whatever. And she had a really rough time of it. And I think there was harm done, right? Because she was a thin Caucasian female who needed to be on hormones to protect her bones, and she wasn't given them in a timely fashion. So mom was a huge inspiration for me to want to go into women's medicine and do it differently and do it better. And so off to medical school I went, and, I went into delivering babies, and that was magical and wonderful and also really, really hard. And then when I became a parent myself, I needed to shift gears, and I decided to focus on gynecology. And I thought, I'm going to really focus on menopause. And so I did a lot of training with the North American Menopause Society and International Vulvovaginal Disease Society, and an organization called ISWISH, which is International Society for the Study of Women's Sexual Health, because I felt like women don't get good vulvar care, we don't get good menopausal care, and we don't get good sexual medicine care, right? We're told to just have a glass of wine and it'll be fine. And so I really wanted to expand my education, and I did, and that was great. But my patients kept coming in with questions that I couldn't answer. So they were coming in with supplements that I didn't know anything about, and they were saying things like, I think I have adrenal fatigue. And I didn't know what that was. And so when I was at Menopause Society, we asked, a group of us were like, hey, our patients are asking about this. And we were sort of swatted down, like, that doesn't exist. And I thought, well, I got a whole bunch of women back in Raleigh that would really have something to say about that. They're miserable, right? Mm-hmm. And so then I needed to go find a group of folks that were curious, that were asking more questions. There's got to be more here. Didn't think my patients were crazy. I thought they were miserable, and I needed to try to help them. So I started going to more and more conferences, and then sort of once you learn from the other side, you can't go back.
That's right.
When you learn, oh, well, why are we letting people eat white flour all day long and have high fructose corn syrup? And why in God's creation are we giving it to our children? So I got bitten by the spider, and I kind of went to town. And I was really fortunate that I was working part-time at the time. I have a really supportive husband and two fabulous boys that do their own laundry and cook their own dinner sometimes. And they really gave me the support so that I could go back to school, do a fellowship while I was working. And then I finished the Institute for Functional Medicine program in 2019 and left my corporate medicine job and started my own practice. So now I'm in Raleigh, and my focus is kind of midlife women's health. And my goal is to help women reimagine midlife. We are not just getting fat and tired. This is not just part of it. I refuse to accept that as a midlife woman myself. Maybe I need to look at my blood sugar. Maybe I need to look at my gut microbiome. Let's be curious together. Let's try to figure out what's going on so that we can change midlife. Because it doesn't have to be exhausted and pudgy, right?
That's awesome. I'm sure there are so many WOMIs in your practice that are so relieved to have a doctor that will listen to them and that is curious. Because I feel like a lot of us are like not giving credit for how much we are willing to do to get better, and we just need somebody that will work with us, so we're not just out in the wilderness ordering things on Amazon hoping that it's gonna work out. And to have somebody who really knows what they're doing to work with, I feel like is such a gift. And I talk about functional medicine in the book, but with a major caveat that there's not that many functional medicine doctors. And so I really hope that will be something that more and more people start to sort of make the shift that you made, and to start working with this patient population that, as we've said, is there. It's just being told that they're not there, but they are there and they need a lot of help. And so thank you. I'm grateful to you for making that switch, and I hope that other doctors will follow in that path.
Hi, this has been wonderful. I've been enjoying so much y'all's conversation, and we have a question from our audience, so I'm just going to go ahead and ask that now. Thank you so much for your book. This is from Linda, and pushing to write it. If I have an integrative med PCP with whom I had a negative experience, should I go back and talk to her about it, or let go and move on with her still? She is more promising than Duke or UNC docs that I've known.
I'll let Dr. Watson answer that one. What do you think?
So I think that I would take an assessment of sort of where your energy levels are and how much that takes out of you, right? And so And then I also think that you might want to think about how receptive is that a good use of your energy? So I would really hope, we would all like to hope that we all are able to receive feedback and are welcoming feedback, and that we all want to heal. And it could be a real gift to her. She could learn from it. She could have an opportunity to apologize. She could have an opportunity to change, and it might open up a blind spot that she had. And she could also say, gosh, you know what? I was having a really crappy day and we put my dog down, and I am so sorry that came across in your appointment, right? Like you never know. But I would sort of think about, like, what's that going to take out of you? And if it's too big of a sacrifice for you, is it something that your partner could write if you have a partner, or So I would just sort of think about your energy and your heart, and first working on your own healing. And if that's going to feel like a big sacrifice, then maybe you can delegate it, or maybe you can let it go. And it may be healing for you to write the letter. But I know that's what I say.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I think doing an assessment, like you said, of like, is this the type of person who might be receptive to this or not, I think is worth thinking through. If it really feels like no, then I wouldn't. Personally, I wouldn't. However, I will say that, this is in the book, like the one time I really was like, got over the hurdle of how energy expensive it is to write one of those letters, because it's so difficult to confront somebody where the power imbalance is so enormous. The one time I did that, I got like the most important diagnosis back of my entire journey, where he wrote back to me like within an hour and was like, oh, you should check out, if you've got damage to your pelvic nerves. And I was like, what? I should? And so, and this is somebody I'd been seeing for a while, and he had never suggested that until I wrote this letter and was like, hey, buddy, you really, he had done something wrong, and I had to let him know about that. And I told him, and he wrote back to me, and he was like, oh, I'm sorry you had that experience. Here's something else you should check out. And it led to this incredible watershed for me. So, you just have to weigh it out. But I think protecting yourself all the way, that like, even if it doesn't work out, you're doing it because you will feel better having written that letter. If you won't feel better having written that letter, I wouldn't do it.
Can I ask a question of Sarah, or if there are not other questions?
Go for it. I was just gonna ask, but you go ahead. Go for it, Polly.
Well, when I went to medical school, we were taught that informed consent was describing a procedure, risk, benefits, and alternatives. And I think consent, particularly around an operation, is done in a really stupid way in medicine, because you're naked in your little hospital gown, the IV's in, the OR's prepped. It's some godforsaken hour of the morning. You haven't eaten. No one around you has eaten. Your parents have come from their doctor jobs. They're all there. The decision's already been made, right? And yet you're thrown this piece of paper that says basically you're going to die, and we can have 5 medical students working on you, and you have to sign it, right? And so one of the things that stuck out for me that just broke my heart was how consent was not done properly with you over and over and over again. And so I wonder if we could kind of strategize together about ways that, in hindsight, and how could we share information with other WOMIs about going into a surgical or a procedure, so that we could give them agency back for their own consent. Because I think robbing that, being violated by the medical system is shouldn't happen.
No. Yes. So this is a perfect segue, because the doctor I was just talking about, there's this horrible scene in the book of this. I was supposed to have one procedure done. It had been described to me by one doctor that was like, here's the procedure that's going to happen. He did not communicate properly with like the doctor that actually performed the procedure. So the doctor who actually performed it, in his mind, was like, we're going to do this other procedure. And it's exactly as you just said, which is I showed up. I was the first person that he was operating on. So it was like 5 o'clock in the morning when I showed up. I'm shivering in my paper gown. And yes, somebody came in and dropped this like consent form in my lap. And I looked over it and I was like, yeah, I mean, this is what we talked about, right? and he was like, yeah. And so I signed it. And it actually turned out that there was a miscommunication between the doctors. And so what he thought I was talking about when I said, this is what we talked about, was the wrong thing. And so I went in and he performed like a pretty horrible wrong procedure. Yeah, it's really bad. And so in retrospect, but it is true that I have the signed form that says, well, you agreed to this. And I just didn't, it's like getting the accept terms and conditions, that's like 50 pages long for your iPhone. It's like, well, it's on you. If you didn't, read that we're allowed to steal your information and, hack your phone and do these things, if you don't know that because you read this very dense document. And so I would love to hear from you what you would do in that same scenario, because I thinking back, I'm like, oh gosh, I should have done that differently. But even still, I'm not actually sure exactly what I would have done differently, just because some of that language in like the form that you're given is so medicalized that I don't know that I would have known the difference between what he was talking about and what the other doctor had been talking about.
So this is not done, and I'm just kind of thinking about, as a woman, right? How could you change things? And so what I would suggest, and I would hope your physician would be open to, but they may not be open to, well in advance of the procedure, at least a week before the procedure, you write out what you think is going to happen. You write out what you expect the procedure to do for you, and you write out your understanding of the risk of the procedure. And you should also write out, I know my other choices would be X or Y, right? And then, it could be a page, whatever, but a lot of doctors' offices have these patient portals, right? So a week, give them time to do it, not the night before the procedure at midnight. Give them time to do it. Write out, hey, Dr. X, I want to make sure I understand this in my own terms and my own words so that there are not any surprises. This is my understanding of what we're doing and why, the risk involved and the alternative. Could you let me know if I'm on the right page? And if I'm not, could you please clarify that for me?
That's great. I'm going to do that. I had a similar thing in terms of pain management post-op, that for me, I also have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And it turns out if you have Ehlers-Danlos, we can be very resistant to different types of pain medications and anesthesia. I didn't know that. And so I had a surgery done where afterwards I was basically like, didn't feel like I had any pain management at all. And they're like, well, that's not possible. I was like, it's possible. It's happening, but they wouldn't give me more because, they're very careful about pain management. And so I was so confused and upset and basically didn't have pain control after a surgery. Later, when I was talking to my pain doctor, she learned that I have Ehlers-Danlos, and she's like, oh, you have Ehlers-Danlos, and so you need to, a week before you have any procedure, you need to do exactly what you just said. You need to write a letter to the surgeon and tell them to, and you're going to bring it with you. She was like, you should staple it to your hospital gown to say, I have Ehlers-Danlos. This is very common for us to need 2 to 3 times more, local anesthesia than, a regular patient. Here is what my pain doctor has written out for me, et cetera. And she was like, don't go into this without sending it to them ahead of time and without carrying it in your hands, clutching in your hands.
Like, when you go staple it to your paper gown. Like, before you make an incision, you have to get past this.
She was like, don't let go of it until the anesthesiologist has agreed. And that was incredibly helpful advice for me, because I did that. And then I got real pain management, was like, oh, this isn't so bad, as opposed to the other surgery where it was really bad. Did we lose Dr. Watson?
No, I'm here.
Oh, I can't see you. On my side, I can't see you. Well,
I'm still here.
I can see her.
Oh, it's just my side. Okay.
Well, I have a couple more questions that have popped up, so I'm just going to ask one specifically. This is from Pam, who's loved the discussion. She says, you've mentioned several people who have written on autoimmune and Lyme, etc., and I would like to read more of their work. Could you list a few names in the chat or say the names again, please?
Sure. Maybe you have people. I was mentioning Neil Nathan. He wrote a book called Toxic. I think the other person that's known for a lot of autoimmune work is Amy Myers. Mm-hmm. Sarah, do you have other people that you would recommend?
Yeah, I like Amy Myers. I like Dr. Terry Walls. She writes a lot about autoimmunity. And I talk about Chris Kresser in the book. These are all sort of prominent functional medicine people that I really like, we talked about this before this started, functional medicine. The reason I like it so much is that it really is this, it's taking sort of everything that's known in alternative medicine, but looking at the science of what's going on and sort of trying to trim away all of like the least evidence-based stuff and really just focus on what is most evidence-based, what's most data generated. And that, to me, I like that because I do come out of traditional medicine and I'm pretty woo-woo like in my personality, but not in terms of thinking through these problems. I want it to be evidence-based. I want it to be as close to regular medicine as possible. And that's what I find functional medicine to be, is basically, instead of sort of emotionally rejecting, a gluten-free diet, being like, well, I don't buy it, being like, well, let's look at the data and the science. The data and the science actually shows us that this is important. We need to take this seriously. And here are the specific ways you would implement a diet like this. And here's the types of patients and the types of testing that you would use. Like that to me seems rational. but a lot of people, they have a real emotional response to a lot of stuff in alternative medicine. And that, if I were to have an emotional response, I would be medicated and sent away. But when doctors have an emotional response, it's just viewed as an extension of science, and that's wrong. Doctors have emotions too, and they have, biases as well. And so I think that that's one of the reasons I really like functional medicine doctors.
Okay, we're at 7 o'clock. I might ask one last question if I can. This is from Linda making a comment that she's with you all the way, recognizes all your syndromes, symptoms, and treatments. She tried 6 months of Annie Potter. She says, I'm getting the impression that we still need to put info together from different resources and that you do not have any caregiver who gets your big picture. Is that the case still?
No, I do have a really incredible integrative / functional medicine, sort of somewhere in between, doctor who is like incredible, that I finally found after a very, very long time searching, again, in the wilderness. I found somebody that I really like. And that's what I want for everyone, is just this. It's very similar to Dr. Watson. That's just somebody who is kind of compassionate and knows what they're talking about. And they don't have to cure you. That's what I keep saying. I'm like, I get it. Lots of illnesses cannot be cured. That's just life on planet Earth. And I accept that and I understand that, even though I'm going to keep trying to get better. But every patient deserves to be believed and to have some type of care and compassion offered to them when they're suffering. And so anyway, so I have found a sort of an integrative doctor that's very good, very knowledgeable, and has helped me navigate a lot of this, even though he hasn't, come up with the cure. We're both hopeful one day.
Can I jump in really quick? I loved the shift in Sarah's book where you kind of got your badass on and you were like, I'm not going to be the polite wilting flower. I'm going to like really advocate for myself. And I had a patient who came in last week who made it very clear to me that I had not gotten the job yet. She was very polite. I don't mean to imply that she wasn't, but I was interviewing for her, the position of her doctor, and she was very organized and had a lot of questions. And I thought, this is brilliant. Like, you're about to invest a lot of time, money, and energy, and you're shopping around. Great. She was completely transparent about it. It was great. And so I think I would encourage folks that are feeling like they're not being heard to reclaim some of that power. And instead of saying, I'm in this vulnerable place, will you take care of me? Say, do you have the communication skills? Do you have the knowledge set? Do you have a compassion that I need for you to be my doctor? And so you can make an appointment, and say, okay, I'm not sure I'm ready to sign up yet. Here's my list of questions. And I thought, more power to you. Like, that's smart.
Yes, it's funny. That's what my doctor always says to me. Whenever I slip back into apologetic mode, he's like, hold on, I work for you. And I'm like, oh, it's so nice to hear that. But I agree. And with your advice sorry for the siren, but to a patient, to go in as if you're interviewing them for the job, not in a confrontational way, but, just as you would for anybody you were hiring. And you, even if they're not up to the job, you will feel better that you didn't just like go in there and get like kind of, you know, thrown around and pushed around and, you know, walk out feeling bad about yourself. You'll just walk out feeling like, no, that person wasn't right for the job. And I think that that's better emotionally for you if you can muster the energy. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes, like when you're really sick, I mean, you can barely even speak. So it depends on where you're at on the spectrum. But I like that advice.
One final question from Susie, who wants to hear if you've heard of Gabe Golden. He has a documentary called Lighting the Path, and he got better using biological medicine. She thinks that you've probably heard of him, but if not, she just wants to say thank you for writing the book. She's a WOMI, and it was so great to read it. So Gabe Golden was her question. You know him?
I don't know that. Yeah, I don't know. I'll look him up. Thank you.
Lighting the Path is what it's called. It's in the chat.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Susie, and thank you other people who commented. Hello.
So thank you, Sarah. I know that this was your event for the day, and we really appreciate you taking the time and coming and talking with us and with Dr. Watson. This was wonderful. I think I'm going to make an appointment with you, Dr. Watson, as a woman of a certain age who has lots of questions. I think I'm going to come over to Raleigh and meet with you in person sometime soon.
Well, interview me. Make sure I'm the right girl for the job.
I know. I am your client. I will definitely do that. Well, we're about to close out the event, so I'd like to tell you a few reminders. If you want to purchase a copy of Sarah's book, you can find it on our website, in our store, or you can click the buy button on screen. I'm going to buy several copies for friends and family because I think that there are a lot of people that would benefit from this book. If you missed some of our conversation tonight, or if you'd like to share it with a friend, you can find it recorded on Crowdcast. And finally, please keep an eye out for other upcoming events in our weekly newsletter and on our website. Thank you so much for joining us tonight and for supporting Flyleaf Books. Good night.
Thank you all.